Alright, what's going on everyone? My name is Isaac Mijangos, and in this video we're going to go over the Canon 6D Mark II and the current state of it as of March 2020. I wanted to make the video because it might be helpful for you, whether deciding to go with a DSLR system as we make the transition from DSLR to mirrorless, and where I think you're just better off buying another camera. This is not going to be a super fancy video because one, I only have one camera and one lens, so not too much b-roll. It's just going to be just like a regular talking head for most of the video. Let's start off with video, which is mainly what I've been using it for. I think the dual pixel RAW is incredible in most well-lit aspects, that it just grabs the focus like that and it doesn't let it go. Like if I'm moving here or I'm moving outside, I think it does just a tremendous job in that aspect. And then the second aspect is that you get this flip screen and it's incredibly helpful. You save a bunch of money on a second monitor like a mini HD, and I think it's just really well worth it in that aspect because like even when it misses the focus and it tries to grab the focus, I love how smooth it is in grabbing that, and I think Canon is the only one that really does that well. There's not a huge like a huge stutter in that aspect of the camera. And most importantly, I think for this sort of small niche of people, the vloggers, is that the colors right out of the camera look phenomenal, beautiful, and there's not too much color grading. I think a great example of someone who does this on the constant is Peter McKinnon. He said that sometimes he doesn't even color grade anything because the colors on Canon are so great, and I think that's a pretty large consensus in the photo community, that Canon just holds those colors really, really well in video. And if you don't know too much about color grading, or you're just starting off right now, moving from your small DSLR, from your like Canon T2i or the Rebel series onto this, I think you'll find it really, really great to have that consistency, and you're just reducing the amount of friction when it comes to creating content, especially if you're trying to pump out 2 to 3 videos every single time. And I think it's just a really, really great camera to do that and reduce the amount of steps in order to produce a video. Number 3 is the range of the system. I don't think we really talk too much about this. Yes, we talk about the latest and greatest aspects of the camera. Does it have dual pixel RAW? Does it have zebra, etc.? But Nikon and Canon have been around the longest. They've had their share of the market for the longest amount of time. They put out the most amount of lenses within the United States, and I think if you choose either system, you're going to be able to find stuff on the second-hand market for a much, much better price. And I think if you're a beginner or you're in an intermediate spot, finding those lenses, finding that niche, finding the lenses that are right for you is going to be much easier for you to grab them, hold on to them, test them out, and then resell them for the value, because they will retain their value for quite a long time. That ranges from lens to lens. It's not all going to be the same. The market will change depending on, the volatility of it. Like one lens might just all of a sudden become extremely popular. For example, the 35mm by Canon that has stayed consistently very, very profitable over the years. So just consider that when you buy into a system, because it's really, really important, because you can't be going on switching around from system to system. Not only are you losing money, but you're never really getting good with the fundamentals of that, and you're not really expanding the range of the camera to its fullest. So number 4 is asking yourself whether you want to do solely photo or video. For me, the Canon 6D at the time struck the perfect balance between being photo and video. However, I will say that in video, it is very, very stagnant, especially when you compare it to like a Sony a6400 or a GH5, which still holds a tremendous amount of value. And we'll get a little bit more into that, but to me, when I was purchasing it, I'm like, okay, I still do video and I still do photo, so this seems really, really fair in that aspect, and that's why I gravitated towards it. We'll get into just a bit more about the stagnation in the video, because if I'm being completely honest, this video camera is mainly for the vloggers, and even then there are way, way better options. And I think one thing that's really, really important is number 5, which is this is not a first-gen product. This isn't the first one to have a flippy screen, or it's not the first one to have dual pixel. It's one of the first, but it is not the first. So it is way, way better off in that aspect compared to like your Sonys or your GH5, which I hear has a bunch of focusing issues, especially since it's micro four thirds, and you have to sort of deal with that crop factor all the time. For me, having full frame is just a really phenomenal thing. The way that the camera is built to last, and I've never really had any problems even under heavy conditions. So that's always something to consider. I've always considered that with every single camera purchase and every single, technological purchase. One of my biggest regrets is the MacBook Pro. So always consider that, especially when you're buying cameras which are known to evolve way faster in certain regions, like the Rebel series and the Nikon series and the Canon 70Ds. There's always going to be an evolution every year as compared to the high-end professional 5D Mark IVs or the 1DX. Make sure you're not buying a first-gen product. And I feel like that's where you're going to find your safety net in the Canon 60 system. Now moving on to the not so great things, which to me is the price. Man, this is like one of the biggest factors when it comes to buying a new camera, especially if you're upgrading from your crop sensor. I know that feeling of wanting the very best, but it's also about staying within your budget. And I still think that if you don't find like a great bundle that comes with extra stuff, I always suggest Adorama, because one, they have some really great bundles. I got both of these awesome tripods right here free because I bought it with a bundle. But even then, I think that the price point that the 60 has stayed on is very expensive for what you're getting. And if you're like really niche and you're really into vlogging, I think this is one of the best cameras. For me personally, the biggest thing was the durability, and DSLRs, like in one of my previous videos, is the durability is still there. It has some of the best engineering, and with previous weather sealed Canon cameras, I never had a problem. But mirrorless are the future. They are the best in terms of the video, especially the Sonys and the GH5, if you're able to adapt to sort of their small quirks. But I think Sony right there kind of takes that out of the cake, especially if you go for older models, and sort of be willing to, trust yourself when you're putting these cameras in sort of these bizarre locations. Number two, which is unfortunately for photo, I didn't want to believe that the 60 had horrible dynamic range, but after a few sessions, after a few photos that I've taken, I can say that the dynamic range to this day is awful. I've tried recovering highlights, shadows from and the highlights are the worst part about the photo, and like, to me, that's what I clip out from time to time. So I cannot recommend it for that reason, because I've never had a problem with any full frame camera, whether it be a Nikon or a Sony or a Canon, giving me problems with dynamic range. But unfortunately, the brand that I trusted the most to handle that in a great aspect for what you're getting really let me down with the highlights. And I've had a few photos that it's impossible to recover. Like, I know for a fact that if I took this shot with even a 5D Mark II, that this photo would be savable, but it's not. For that reason, I gotta be honest, I can't recommend it. So I'm always very careful when I shoot, and I try to overexpose the highlights. You have to do it sometimes for the artistic flair, but unfortunately that's the reason I can't recommend it, and that's the reason why you might be hesitant when it comes to buying this camera. Number three, which is attaching beautiful old glass onto these mirrorless systems. That is by far one of the biggest advantages. One of the really cool aspects I find about mirrorless cameras, you're just not really able to do that with the DSLRs. You have to find some crazy, Frankenstein way of doing it. It's very appealing to try out old lenses to see the effect of it, to see how it looks in pose, how it handles the colors in Lightroom, and sort of experiment. And unfortunately, DSLRs were never capable. To me, that's one of the trades that I had to do. Companies are shifting away from even building EF lenses. I think we already saw Canon saying, hey, we're gonna stop building EF lenses for the EF mount, so it's just part of the time. And I think that's why mirrorless are way more attractive in that aspect. Just old glass would be phenomenal to test, and you just get a wider range of options whenever you're going into the system. Number four is the amount of video features. Now, at the start I said, it's great for a niche group of people, like the vloggers, like the 60 FPS, 24 FPS, 30 FPS at 1080. That's definitely the current state of it. I don't see 1080 going away anytime soon, so you're definitely gonna get far with this. But let's say you decide to sort of branch out into different realms of YouTube or different realms of video making, especially somewhere in the tech space where you're expected to have sort of this beautiful, smooth transition 120 at 4K. It's not a expandable camera in that aspect. This is just one man's opinion again, but it's not very interchangeable. You have to understand what your market is going to be. For me, it's the tech space. And that's one thing I wish I knew, like, oh man, like this is sort of limiting. Of course, you also have to study like light and like how to make a great production. But to me, this is not a very expandable camera, especially if you plan on moving up and up and up. Last but not least is number 5, which is something that I didn't even realize was really important, which was how long, this body is going to retain its value. The 5D series is a great example of one series that has just retained its value all across the board. You look at the 1 through 4, they're all holding their value very, very well. The 60, not so much, because, the 5D just introduced an incredible set of ranges for anybody. And even the Sony a6000 lineup is incredible. The A7 series and the 60 Mark II just seems like another camera that you just don't really think too much about, because people are going to recommend to you that you get the 5D series or the Sony series. You're just not getting a wide set of specs in this camera, in my personal opinion, for what you're paying for, unfortunately, right? So always be considerate of that and make sure that you're buying a product that's going to last you a long time. For me, I see myself buying a mirrorless after this. So what would I recommend for whether you're doing video or photo? I still think for photo and video, if you're finding the balance, this is a really great camera, but I personally would not hold onto it for very, very long. For video, I think you're just way better off with a Sony or with a GH5. And if you're spending this much, I think the Blackmagic camera is getting amazing reviews, so you're better off with that, but you're just way better off buying the Blackmagic cameras. And I think this advice is more towards the people that are going from crop sensor to a full frame camera. You should know, do I just want to do video? I think at that point you're just better off with the cameras that I mentioned. But if you want to do photo and video, really consider the Sony lineups. The A7 III is probably dropped in price with the A7 IV coming out. Or I would personally just wait, if your pockets are that deep, wait for the Canon R5, because it's just going to be way, way better off. And hopefully they don't butcher anything with the Canon series. And I think Nikon has also unveiled some really, really great mirrorless cameras, and they have just improved so much in terms of video that you're better off buying that. So unfortunately, the Canon 6D is just an awkward camera in its space. However, it does hold some sort of weight, and I think it's a sort of an underrated camera to some extent. But that's it. I think those are my thoughts and my opinions, but that's it. So hopefully you can check out the podcast. I sort of went over the thoughts of that, and you can check out previous videos, especially mirrorless versus DSLR. And I still think mirrorless have their place, but not as much, especially with the world transitioning to mostly video. Anyways, at the end of the day, I thank you so much for your time and your attention. My name is isaacmijangosBIZ, and I'll catch you in the next one.